I'm the single mother everyone's been bashing lately. I have one son. He's a good kid. He doesn't drink, smoke, or do drugs. He's at the top of his class. Good athlete, too. And he even has an after-school job. Interesting. No one ever puts him on the evening news. I'm not alone. You know, most of my friends are single parents and doing just fine, thank you. But for those who are struggling with their kids, they need your understanding, not your anger. So do us a favor, and please stop blaming all of society's ills on the single mother. You're really deceiving yourselves, you know.
Three, two, one, stop testing. 3, 2, 1, stop nuclear testing. How's the sound, person? Have we stopped testing those god-awful weapons? We have? All right. Hi, my name's Jose, and I want to welcome you to Politically Correct Cooking, a show that combines a cooking show with a political talk show. What a concept, what a combination, what fun. Our show today, it's a very special show, very special subject. As a matter of fact, it's number one subject of concern in our country. It's the subject of youth-on-youth violence. Please welcome from the National Conference of Black Lawyers, Adjoa. Come on down. Glad you can make it on down. How you doing?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm doing great.
Great. Well, the number one issue of concern in our country, youth violence, a lot to talk about. But before we dive into that, what is on the menu today?
Well, today we're fixing one of my favorites, which is a sauteed vegetable dish with brown rice.
This is a vegetarian show, so it's the right show for the right meal. Great. Okay. Well, what do you want us to do here? And
well, why don't we cut up some of the green peppers and red peppers, and maybe you can cut up some of the other.
Okay, I can do that.
Broccoli.
Well, when talking about crime, there seems to be this difference between, say, the myth, the reality versus the fears people have. Mm-hmm. I know when people watch TV, it seems like every TV show opens up with black-on-black violence, people saying, this kid shot this kid for a jacket, this other kid, there was a drive-by because he dissed me. While the reality is that the real criminals in this country are corporations that are killing thousands of us, and yet they seldom make the news. So what I just wanted to let our viewers know is when you're watching the news, keep that reality in mind. Now, even though youth violence is very sad, very tragic, the real killers, they don't really wear colors, they wear coats and ties.
Okay. Well, I think that I like how you started off with that we have to divide the things between what's myth and what's reality. I think the reality is, if anyone has been keeping up with the news, the crime rate in this country has actually been coming down gradually. There has been an increase, however, in violence among all youth. And one of the things that I think you pointed out is that when you turn on the TV, what is depicted is as if the violence is an issue of black or issue of persons of color. The data shows that violence has gone up drastically among all youth. That's the only crime, the random violence, the random murders, is the only crime that has really gone up. And that not tremendously, but has been an increase in crime. The other myth, therefore, is that's the myth. The myth is that it's a black problem or it's a Latino problem. The increase in violence in this country is a problem of youth. The second myth is that, in fact, if we build more prisons and have more death penalties, that in fact will decrease the violence, this random violence that we're seeing. That myth is totally incorrect, because for the past 10 to 12, 15 years, we've had any number of increases in sentencing, from people being charged with simple possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine having a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years, to mandatory life sentences. Many states already had the 3 strikes and you were out, so many people were getting life without parole. And that has not resulted in a significant effect has not led to any effect on crime. So that the second myth, I think, is important for the listening and viewing audience to understand is the things that many politicians are pushing down their throat as things that will, in fact, help make them safer. The evidence is clear that it's not. That people don't feel any safer, even though crime generally has gone down. People still don't feel safer, and that in fact, violence, the crime that is the most concern to people right now, has gone up. So those are some of the myths and the realities that we need to deal with, and people need to address if they really want to address the problem of crime in their community.
Just one of the examples regarding the 3 strikes you're out. Just recently, a person in California was sentenced to a long term in prison for stealing pizza. It was his 3rd offense. A lot of people don't realize that an individual who is incarcerated, it costs our government $30,000 a year, while versus a Harvard education that might be even cheaper.
Exactly.
So
and that's another myth. The myth is that in fact, if we put monies, these kind of, the data shows that a very conservative figure for the amount we spend to construct one jail cell is about $50,000, one jail cell. That to maintain a person in jail or in prison is at minimum approximately $25,000 to $30,000 a year. So that we're spending a tremendous amount of resources to isolate people, segregate them from the society, and in fact make them worse in so many ways, when we could spend 1/8 of that on any individual person and deal with the problems that may have led them to get involved in the criminal punishment system to begin with. So the other myth is that somehow we are using our resources, as scarce as they may be, in an appropriate way, when in fact we're using it in a very inappropriate way.
Now, the death penalty as a means of deterrence doesn't seem to work. Looking at a list of countries around the world that actually have the death penalty, there's very few of them. I think the United States is in league with
South Africa,
and I believe Iran and maybe Pakistan. And all the other countries, I might have my figures wrong, pretty much have abolished the death penalty. What is the situation with the death penalty now in the United States? There's been a strong movement trying to abolish it, but it never seems to get across through the wall, those barriers that are set up.
Right.
What's the situation now with the death penalty?
Well, with the death penalty, and I think that whether you're correct that all countries have, I think that it's clear that most Western countries, if not all Western countries, have gone to abolishment of the death penalty. Some have had it abolished for years. The situation with the death penalty in the United States is much like, as I was mentioning about these long sentences, these prison terms, that these sentences, the death penalty, does not make us have a safer community. The death penalty is really in the United States only a vengeance punishment. Why do I say that? Because if you look at the data shows that in fact states with the death penalty not only don't have a lower violent crime rate, but in many instances have a higher violent crime rate. If you look at the data that talks about what happens in many jurisdictions after someone has been murdered by the state, because that's what the state's doing, they're murdering someone, that in fact violent crime goes up in that area as opposed to down. So that clearly not only does the death penalty not have a deterrent effect, which is the myth that people put out, that somehow if we kill people, that somehow that will stop other people from killing people, which is a myth. But it not only doesn't decrease crime, it increases violence. The last thing that I think is important to say about not only the death penalty, but many of our other punishments, and we have some things on the refrigerator that reflect this, is that our punishments in this country are disproportionately applied to people of color, most particularly black people, most particularly around issues of drugs, and they are disproportionately applied to the poor. So that in addition to the myth being that they in and of themselves have an effect, the myth is that somehow we are becoming a colorblind society, and the reason why there's so many black folk in prison is because they're just more criminal. The reality is that many times the inner city communities, which are largely black, overwhelmingly poor, are targeted by law enforcement agencies to in fact punish for drug crimes, when in fact the data is clear that the overwhelming majority of people who use drugs in this society are white and are from the suburbs. But this country and the governments, the law enforcement agencies have targeted people of color and the poor to enforce the laws.
So if they targeted, say, for example, some suburban high schools, instead of having a bunch of kids in jail for crack, you're going to have a bunch of kids in jail for LSD.
Right. LSD or powder cocaine. The other thing is that the laws in this country, again, if you want to look at why, in fact, we may have more black youth in prison for drug offenses, the laws in this country are discriminatory even against white and black youth as it relates to cocaine. For example, the federal sentencing guidelines and a number of state sentencing guidelines give 5 years for 5 grams automatically. It's a mandatory minimum if a person is convicted of possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine. That's about, I think, a sugar packet, one of those little sugar packets or so of substance. It takes 500 times that amount of powder cocaine for a person to be found, get a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years. The data is clear. The data shows that about 90% of those convicted of possession of crack cocaine are black, whereas about 80% of those convicted of powder cocaine are white. So the law built in a leniency for powder cocaine, which is much more used by white youth and white people, than for crack cocaine, which is the street drug of choice for young black and Latino youth.
Well, what we want to do is, we're getting carried away with this conversation. We want to find out what's going on with the cooking. How are we doing here?
We're doing fine.
How are my carrots?
Your carrots are looking great. Your broccoli's looking good, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, going back to one of the main reasons for crime, drugs. What is your view on drugs? Should they be decriminalized? Should there be more help legalized? What would you suggest to, say, the city legislators or state legislators on how to deal with crime problems? Instead of spending $30 million on a new prison, why don't we do something else?
I think, first of all, we have to recognize that drug abuse is an illness. Drug abuse is not a crime. The only reason drug abuse is a crime is that we have made illegal the possession and use of certain drugs. But the reality is that drug abuse is really a health issue. Anyone who has experienced, either firsthand because of themselves or a relative or a friend, someone who abuses drugs should understand that that is something that is not necessarily within the willpower of the person. They get hooked, they get addicted. I mean, we can look at the particular situation, even the drug that is legal in this country, cigarettes. Cigarettes. Let's look at cigarettes.
Thousands of people die every year.
And not only just die, they get hooked. There was evidence on the Hill that was introduced in this last Congress that drug companies are adding nicotine to the tobacco to make it even more addicting, because they want to get you hooked.
And they're targeting the ads to kids.
They target youth of color, and they target youth in general, and they target poor communities.
And if you go to a poor community, you see billboards everywhere extolling alcohol and cigarettes.
But the issue really, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. We got a great video coming up, and I just wanted to introduce it, but go ahead and say your point.
Well, the point I want to make is to get back to your point about what about these drugs, is if we look at addiction as a health problem, then we would recognize that what we're doing, locking people up, is not going to address the real issue.
It just keeps coming back.
It keeps coming back.
Folks at home, we got some more great conversation coming up, but we have this great video. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Roll it. So.
I'm Kimmy. I have dreams. I want to be healthy. I want to eat. I want my mommy to be happy. I have dreams. I want to swim in the ocean. I want ice cream. I have dreams. I want to grow up. Now I know my ABC. Next time won't you sing with me?
So how's it coming along?
It's coming along very well.
Well, while we were at the video, folks, we did a lot of cooking over here. Can you fill us in on what went on?
Sure. What I did was I added my herbs to this. I used garlic and sage and marjoram and
Smells great.
Fresh onions, of course, and cayenne pepper. And I added all my mushrooms were already added. I added green peppers and red peppers, and now we're getting ready to add the vegetables, and they should be ready in a few minutes.
We are zipping right along. It smells delicious, and I will let you.
Okay, we're adding carrots and broccoli and some more onions. I use a lot, it's kind of consistent with the topic we're talking about. I use things that are healing. There are a lot of people of color, particularly black people, that suffer from high blood pressure and diabetes, and some herbs are excellent for that. They've shown that garlic is excellent for it, and tying it into the criminal justice issue, we have to figure out how we can heal our communities in order to decrease the violence that we're seeing among our youth.
In the first part of the show, it was kind of depressing. What we want to do is the second part of the show, let's find out how we can leave our audience with a little bit of optimism. What would you suggest the government is doing wrong? Why are youth violent rates going sky high?
Well, first of all, I guess my view is that it's not just the government that is doing things wrong. I mean, the issue of violence in our communities and violence from our youth is an issue that is not only the responsibility of government, but it's the responsibility of us as communities. There's an African proverb. Yes, there's an African proverb that says it takes a whole village to raise a child. One of the things I think that we're doing wrong is, as I said earlier in the show, we are addressing violence and we're addressing drugs and crime from the point of view of let's just become more punitive and punish and lock them up forever, as opposed to addressing it from the point of view of what are the causal factors that lead to it. Surely if we look at our society, we can see that anytime you turn on the TV, you mentioned the news. I mean, you look at the news and it's like, my God, did anything happen today other than people getting killed? And all of us who know we live our lives on a day-to-day basis knows that a lot of good things happen. One of the things, if we look at it, is most of our youth are not involved in violence. Why don't we start depicting what is happening in a positive vein within our communities? The second thing is, it's not only the news, but it's all the TV programming. Much of the movies have a violence theme. It's no wonder that our children are learning to devalue human life when they can turn on a TV and human life is devalued on a daily basis. The second thing is that we don't take seriously the violence that is the most, that impacts us the most, so that our youth learn that it's only certain kinds of violence that people care about, and to some extent maybe just being rebellious, which is one of the things about youth, to say, well, to hell with you, I'm going to just do it the way I want to do it. Why do I say that? If we look at, for example, you mentioned earlier in the show carpet violence. Well, there were 25 people killed in I believe it was 93 or 92, by a chicken farmer in North Carolina who had closed the doors, had violated all of the OSHA, which is the federal government's inspection for fire inspection for businesses and corporations, had bolted those doors closed, so when a fire broke out, people could not get out, and 25 people were killed. That person has not only not spent one day in jail, there was no criminal indictment. So that our youth learn that we don't value the deaths of certain people, so we don't value the lives of certain people. The death penalty says the same thing. What do? We begin to teach our youth through our own actions that we do care about people. We begin to demand from our youth that they respect not only each other, but who? Us as their elders. We begin to say to TV manufacturers and movie manufacturers that we will not pay money for you to create movies that show one violent scene and disrespect scene after another. The second thing we do is we realize what creates the conditions of anger that can lead to the kind of violence we're talking about. Poverty. There are millions, 15 million children in this country live in poverty. They are not provided the adequate housing, adequate food, adequate health care, adequate of anything. What makes you think that those persons will not be angry as they come up through life being deprived of the fundamental things that so many of us take for granted? How do we deal with just the increasing intolerance of youth to deal with anger and rage? You mentioned some of the people were getting killed because they stepped on someone's shoe, or they looked at somebody's girlfriend, or they talked to somebody's girlfriend. We have to teach our youth and have classes to talk about how do you deal with rage? How do you deal with anger? How do you deal with conflict? That's something that we from the community can do. One of the things that I would like us to talk about is what can we do in our own communities? What kind of services can we see within our churches, within our community centers, within our community, that we can develop youth programs where youth can come in and talk about what's bothering them, where they can get training on how to resolve disputes, where they can talk about what is the real value of life and how have they been devalued. Because when we're talking about youth of color, we're talking about youth that this whole society for the past 400 years has devalued over time. You can't expect people to have a good sense of themselves if in fact we have told them all along that they aren't worth anything.
Well, the other thing is, for example, school lunch programs. For a lot of poor kids, the only decent meal they have is when they go to school. They want to get rid of it. It will only contribute to more crime.
Well, I think the thing is that we have to look at the fact that if we look at where the government of the United States is going now, has been going, but now with the Republicans in the majority, it's really there. It's to strip away the bases for social upliftment and economic and political upliftment that have been put in place because of years and years of discrimination. You're absolutely right. If we deny youth food, many of those children who were getting the benefit and are getting the benefit of the school breakfast and lunch programs were kids who would go days without eating anything that was proper.
And if they were upset and mad, they had a reason to be.
Exactly.
People just don't understand that.
So that we have to see the issue of crime as really an issue of how do we build a safe and healthy community. And that as we do that, we do it by piecing together all the needs of people.
Well, as an individual, what can an individual do? Sometimes they just feel inundated by everything around them. If you could tell a mother or a father, this is what you can do. It's short, it's simple, it's easy, and it'll help your kids, or it'll help your neighbor's kids.
I would say that people have to look at what has worked with those of us who have somehow, through all of our errors, kind of made it back on the right track. One is we have to keep youth involved in positive activities. From tutorial programs, supplemental educational programs. I know my mother put me in a reading program to try and help me speed read for some reason. But what the issue is really youth, idle minds, really, idle hands. That's the true saying. I mean, it's true, whether you believe in the devil or not, is that you need to keep them involved in positive activity.
They have a lot of energy. You got to keep them focused on good stuff.
We also have to demand that people respect them and respect us. We have to say that, yes, we have an expectation of them that they conduct themselves in a certain way, but we have to treat them in a respectful way as well. And we also have to say within our own communities that we can come together as a community to try and work out these things, that is our power, is us coming together. And we have to finally say to Congress, we are not going to accept any more your lies about what will and won't work when we know all you're doing is killing the poor, killing people of color. It's an act of genocide the way we're dealing with criminal justice. We need to put monies into expand social programs so that every child in this country can have the opportunity to realize their potential.
Truer words have never been spoken. How's the dinner coming along?
Well, the dinner's coming fine. I think it's just about done.
Let me get some plates, because I know time is rapidly fleeing us.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you for coming by. It was certainly an eye-opening experience. I hope the folks at home learned a lot. There's a lot going on. You have to be aware of all the factors that go into actions. There's a lot of contributing factors. Important thing, like we're doing right now, a good healthy meal is very important. Kids who go for days without food tend to be disruptive in class, tend to quit school, tend to get into problems, and that's not what we want.
And also tend not to develop in a very healthy way, so
Right.
they're sicker. That's why we
Right.
can see
They're
a lot
sicker.
of illnesses and people who aren't able to eat properly.
And love is the answer. We've said that on the show very many times. Love is what will get you through the day.
Okay.
So, this delicious. Looks great.
Thank you. Very simple meal to fix.
Very simple meal to fix. And I'll see if it gets the politically correct seal of approval here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay? All right.
Wonderful.
Great.
And before we close the show,
All right.
as being a great guest on a cooking show, I want to present you with our great little cooking hat.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks at home, thanks for watching, and I'm going to enjoy this meal. Till next time, thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Please help. Only if you can.